Well, this simple but beautiful cross that is hanging above our altar today represents Jesus' words in today's gospel, where he says, "Whoever wishes to follow me must take up his own cross every day." Now, the cross, of course, is the symbol of our Christian faith. But if you really think about it, it's kind of an off-putting symbol, isn't it? I mean, after all, the cross is an instrument of death. The cross is a torture device. All of the other world's major faith traditions have much more welcoming symbols to represent their faith. For example, there's the Buddhist wheel, representing interconnectedness. There is the Taoist yin-yang symbol, representing balance and harmony. There is the Islamic crescent and star, representing the light within. There is the Hindu Om symbol, representing universal reality. And there is the Jewish star, symbolizing the divine light, both within and without. All such beautiful and inviting symbols of faith. And yet we as Christians are wearing little crosses around our necks, little torture devices. It would be like wearing a little axe around your neck, or a little guillotine around your neck, or a little electric chair around your neck. And above our Christian churches, we are displaying an instrument of death right above the doors of our own churches. Why would anyone seeing that symbol want to come in and join us if the way of Christianity is the way of misery and suffering and death? Well, Jesus' words in today's gospel were not very welcoming and inviting either. He says to the disciples, "If you seek to follow me, then you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and lose your very life." Now, what did Jesus mean by these instructions? Was he saying that the way of Christianity is the way of misery and suffering and death? Well, these words of Jesus have been so misunderstood over the centuries, as has the symbol of the cross. And so today I would like us to look at this in a brand new light. First of all, let's start with Jesus' instructions to deny yourself. Does that mean that if you want to be a good Christian, you have to say no to all of the things that bring you pleasure and joy? Well, when Jesus gave us the instructions to deny ourselves, he wanted us to deny our false self. The false self is the ego self. It's the self that cares only about itself. I think that the Reverend Polly Moore, in our Words of Integration and Guidance today, explained it so well when she talked about visiting a friend in need and having an out-of-ego experience. She said, "As my friend wept, telling me her story, my own story suddenly evaporated. She snapped me out of my fixation upon me. As I listened to her needs, my ego self didn't matter to me. Only she mattered. Her tears crucified my ego and resurrected God." The more we can have these out-of-ego experiences, the happier we'll be. That is what Jesus meant by denying ourselves. He gave us example after example, instruction after instruction on this. It was one of his key teachings. He told us to bless those who persecute us, to forgive one another 70 times, 7 times, to love our enemies, and to turn the other cheek. And why did Jesus tell us to do all of these things? Because when we do these things, we kill the ego. We crucify the false self so that we can resurrect the true self, the Christ self, the divine self. Now, what about Jesus' instructions to take up our own cross every day? Well, there are some who say that life is suffering and that all of us have crosses to bear in life. But I don't think Jesus wants us to be miserable. After all, Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And he said, "I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full." The cross that Jesus is asking us to carry is a symbolic one. I'd like you to think about it this way. The horizontal line of the cross represents our earthly nature, our human nature. And the vertical line of the cross represents our divine nature, our spiritual nature. When our humanity meets our divinity, it becomes one with it, and we become transformed. The cross, therefore, is no longer a symbol of suffering and torture, but rather a symbol of transformation and new life. That is why I love the symbol of the cross. Someone else who loved the symbol of the cross was the medieval Christian mystic who was known as John of the Cross. John of the Cross wrote a very famous spiritual book called Dark Night of the Soul. And that book is all about the death of the ego. In that book, he wrote, "I have abandoned all I ever sought to be, and in dying, my spirit has been released." He obviously wrote that while he was still alive, because he wasn't talking about his physical death. He was talking about the death of the false self. This is the death that spiritual teachers have been talking about over the centuries. Many of them refer to it as dying before you die. It is when we start to live our life from a place of surrender, not control. It's where we start to shift our thoughts and actions, not from my will be done, but thy will be done. Now, in today's gospel reading, we see that Peter wants his will to be done. And that is why Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Jesus is not suggesting that Peter was possessed by some red guy with horns and a pitchfork. Satan represents the ego-driven part of ourselves that wants things done our way, not God's way. It's why Jesus says to Peter, "You are a stumbling block, for you have your mind set on human things, not divine things." My friends, when we have our minds set on human things, when we are controlled by our ego, we often suffer. But when we set our minds on divine things, when we allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit, we are freed. This way of freedom is the way of Jesus. It is not a way of misery and suffering. It is a way of new life in the Spirit. And so I want to encourage all of you to spend some time this week on the mountaintop, alone with God. In the silence of prayer and meditation, we begin to stop listening to the voice of the ego, and we attune ourselves more deeply to the voice of the divine. In the silence, in the place where our humanity meets our divinity, we return again to the truth of our being. And when we know this truth, we are set free. Hello, everybody. This is Sal Sapienza, and I'm so excited to share with all of you that I've written a brand new book. The book is called Childish Thinking: How the Church Keeps Us Stuck in Sunday School. Now, the title Childish Thinking comes from Christian scripture, where we hear that if we wish to grow in spiritual understanding, then we must let go of childish ways of thinking. And yet so many Christians today, even after years of Bible study and Sunday services, still have a very elementary understanding of their faith. They still understand God as some old man with a long gray beard. They think heaven is a place up in the clouds with pearly gates. that the devil is some red guy with horns and a pitchfork, and that hell is a fiery place below the earth. Those are things that we tell children. None of those descriptions appear anywhere in the Bible. And so in childish thinking, I try to dispel many of those misnomers, and I explore topics such as God, Jesus, heaven, hell, sin, prayer, and resurrection from the higher perspectives of ancient Christian mystics and contemporary progressive theologians. After each chapter, there are prayers for quiet contemplation and questions for personal reflection and journal writing. Come learn how you can let go of old ways of thinking and begin to see things with new eyes. Come and learn how you can finally graduate from Sunday school. The book is available now on Amazon, and you can read the entire introduction at childishthinking.faith.